Disruptors and curious minds, CEOs, founders, book lovers, welcome to the Thinking on Paper Book Club. I'm Mark. This is Jeremy. And if you're listening to this, thank you. Thank yourself for being a critical thinker. Thank yourself for reading between the lines and understanding the importance of bringing your own conclusions to the impact of emerging technologies on business, on your culture, on your life, on your family. In a world that celebrates the humdrum, you are special. Thank you for reading books with us. We're on chapter 9 of Nexus. And you know what, Jeremy? I'm feeling optimistic today.
Ooh.
Because if we ignore for a moment the ongoing damage to the ecosystem, we can nevertheless try to comfort ourselves with the thought that eventually humans did learn how to build more benevolent industrial societies. Imperial conquests, world wars, genocides and totalitarian regimes were woeful. Did I say useful? Woeful experiments that taught humans how not to do it. By the end of the 20th century, some might argue humanity got it more or less right. Yet, even so, the message to the 21st century is bleak. If it took humanity so many terrible lessons to learn how to manage steam power and telegraphs, what would it cost to learn to manage bioengineering and AI? The question from chapter 9. Jeremy, as ever, first impressions.
First, I want to deliver a public service announcement akin to your introductory statement. Synthesis cannot be outsourced. Contrary to popular opinion, it actually happens in here through inputs this way, and this way. So, yeah, let's talk about Mark's feeling positive. I'm going to tiptoe through some kind of intermediary pre-positivity before we get there.
Hold on. Can you hear that? Did you hear that? That was the sound of my optimism bubble bursting, I think.
Fair enough. Sorry about that. Short-lived, like a quark in the small world of microparticles.
In the quark gluon soup of life.
Love it. All right. So it starts off with a pretty cool statement that democracy is this partnership between bureaucracy and mythology. I thought that was pretty interesting. And we run through bad use cases of technology. The theme in this chapter is like, hey, technology in and of itself can't end the world. It's humans' mismanagement of new technologies that cause a lot of issues, right? So let's talk about the technology of imperialism, right? Where due to the industrialization, things becoming more industrial, these technologies that were invented required raw materials, and the race for raw materials sent people all over across the world, conquering other people for raw materials to feed their technologies. Millions of indigenous people crushed to allow other nations to level up, right? So again, this is the bad use of technology. We even call imperialism a technology. Stepping a bit further, and we'll jump back in the positivity here in a second. So we talked about, Stalinism, Nazism has been a theme that he's explored and in a framework that he's explored. This is really interesting. The idea that Stalinism, Nazism brought about the idea of industrial murder. I was like, whoa, industrial murder. That's a hell of a way to say that, but it's spot on. And then obviously the Industrial Revolution's effect on extinctions to other species and that sort of thing. And like you said, Mark, if we had trouble with these technologies, and this was the telegraph and the steam engine, what's going to happen as we move forward with AI and all the other things that you're talking about?
Well, I think the point of chapter 9 is that if we replicate what came before, then the answer is not a very nice one for humanity. I mean, okay, every time a technology emerges, everyone fears the apocalypse. That's not new. Like, this fear of AI isn't new. The Luddites during the Industrial Revolution, but he says that, okay, the Luddites were right, kind of. There was a downside to the Industrial Revolution. Yes, everyone became more wealthy than they had ever been, and there was huge positives from it. There was the downside. It ended and changed traditional social, economic, and political systems. There was before the revolution and after the Industrial Revolution. They were not the same. And Yeah, you mentioned war. I've had enough of Stalin. I don't want to talk about Stalin anymore. He seems to go on about him in every single
Time to turn
chapter.
the corner. Yep.
Yeah, ecological collapse. He speaks about the downside of it, and he proposes a way forward, the democratic way forward to, well, can democracy live in this world, in this AI world? Can the democratic way? And he lays out the structure, the patterns, the things that we need to follow from the democratic way to survive.
So as we've talked about, Google changing their AI principles. I don't mean to harp on this, but I think there's an interesting
You and the
analogy.
butterflies, it's like bloody Yuval and Stalin, the two of you.
Swatting them. Yeah. No. So there's a list of principles that he alludes to in here.
Yes.
That are kind of principles for democracies to follow related to the proper use of technology, and there are 4 of them. Before we kick that off, here's a quote that I found pretty cool. Technology is rarely deterministic, meaning it's just like it's not gonna by itself wreak havoc. But actually, now that I think about it, yeah, we get to Kurzweil's point in time and space, and maybe it starts to become deterministic. But hey, we're staying positive today. Let's talk about these principles. So the first one he calls benevolence, meaning, if these networks are collecting my data, the networks that collect my data should help me rather than manipulate me. Seems pretty straightforward, but I think a lot of people don't look at that when they're building something, especially not even nefarious, building something to make money with. Right?
Yeah, he uses the health system. Doctors know everything about us. Our boss, to some extent, knows a lot about us, and they don't use that information to manipulate us. They use that information to help us. It's benevolence, the first principle in it. But what does he say? Yeah.
Well, I love the idea of him calling the business model being flawed, like big tech business model being flawed, because we pay for these services. Oh, all of this stuff is free. It's great. Like Gmail account. Oh, it's free. It's great. Or, this entry level account for Dropbox or whatever. Oh, it's free. Well, we pay for it with our information, right? So that's the trade-off. And he references, we won't pay Nike with our information and get a set of shoes. But I would argue, I think there'd be a lot of people that would give them information if they were sending out sets of shoes.
Yeah, what do they want to know if I get a pair of Air Jordans out of it? They're about 300 quid these days. So yeah, I'll give them my address, my email address. So that's number 1. Number 2 is decentralization. Democratic society should never allow all its information to be concentrated in one place, no matter whether that hub is the government or a private corporation.
Don't cross the streams. They're saying, don't cross the streams. Don't allow access to all the databases to everybody. Here's an interesting quote there. For the survival of democracy, some inefficiency is a feature, not a bug. Interesting.
Is that about self-correcting mechanisms?
Yeah, you can't I don't think you can optimize those yet, right? There has to be a well, we'll talk more about self-correcting mechanisms, because you have to understand the technology that you're attempting to correct, which is a big challenge. Let's talk about mutuality.
Yep, the third democratic principle.
And dare we say our theme of top down and bottom up comes up again. Mark, tell me about mutuality.
If democracies increase surveillance of individuals, they must simultaneously increase surveillance of governments and corporations too. My note for mutuality is, I don't have much hope for this one.
Wait,
I can buy into benevolence and decentralization, but the idea of this kind of mutual exchange of information, I mean,
so you don't think the Trump White House is going to let me peek into their meetings and take a listen to what they're doing and look at their data exchanges for me to make a better decision and hold them accountable? You don't think that is a possibility?
No, if they know more about us while we simultaneously know more about them, the balance is kept. I mean, yeah, no. Come on.
But sorry. as an operating principle, like,
yeah, as an operating principle, yes, I agree.
Yeah, applying them.
Reality
in real
life has a nasty habit of playing with your principles, doesn't it? I also think his fourth is change and rest. I think he'd ran out of nouns as well, as he had benevolence, decentralization, mutuality, and then change and rest.
I thought that was so the change one I understood. And here's an interesting, quote from it. Oppression can take the form of denying humans the ability to change or denying them the opportunity to rest, right? So racism, caste systems, these were posed as if you go counter to them, you're going against the laws of nature, the laws of God, enter intersubjective realities, again, imposing a balance of truth and order on a group of people, right? And the idea that denying changing between castes or denying the ability to be considered equal as humans kept the order of oppression on top there. The change piece, or I'm sorry, the rest piece, I didn't really grab.
I didn't really grab this bit. I was thinking of it more of like we are constantly in flux. Our neurons are forming and reforming with like neural network. They're plastic. Things are changing. We are never the same. The rest part, we all need a rest. I don't know, but he goes from that to the balance of, and I quite liked this example, but I'm going to take my disagreement out on this as well. He talks about non-rigid AI, and rather than an AI predicting your illness, so this is a continuation from the changing mess, rather than the AI predicting your illness, it helps you avoid being ill. And this is like this different way of looking at it. And I was thinking about the paperclip experiment in last week's show. We were talking about how misaligned, if your goals are misaligned, then you can end up in a very bad state. And if the AI's goal is to make you feel healthy or remain healthy, what ends might it go to make sure that you remain healthy? I don't know. Killing everyone in all the power stations, shutting down all pollution. There's plenty of incredibly psychotic ways that an AI could go about ensuring your health and safety.
You know what I called that? I wrote down in the book margin, a tale of two algorithms, the predicting illness to feed decisions to other entities, to make decisions about lending you money and what your insurance rate should be and all of these other things, versus helping you avoid illness by, say, hey, Mark, ding, 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 time to go out for a run. Hey, Mark, put down that cupcake, right? Some of those things. Tale of two algorithms.
Yeah, I like that. We should write a book about it. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. And people are very aware, I think, of this idea of being surveyed to such a point that the AI or the computers know, for example, that you have something growing inside of you and it's not good, and they pass that information on to your insurance company, and your insurance company increase your price plan, and then you can't get a loan because the insurance company know that you're going to have cancer in 5 years, and that kind of AI feeding that wheel. And if you have the two AIs and you have one that isn't feeding that wheel but is feeding a different flywheel about making you healthy, and maybe then you get the loan and good things happen.
Well, this is interesting that I've brought up open mustard seed before on these shows, and it's like the precursor to personal data sovereignty. It was a non-blockchain solution, a database-driven solution. I think it was out of MIT, but like blockchain could have an impact in this, where you capture and own the on-off streams of data, and you have like APIs. Like normally when apps have APIs, you could have APIs that turn on and off the feed one way, the other way, to where the data is used how you want to use it. But the only way to make sure for certain is that you actually own a digital thing that no one else controls, that no one else sponsors, right? Hey, here's a free thing that you can use, but I need all your shit. It's here's a thing that you own independently, and by operating these levers, your data is not going here, and you're allowing a little bit of it to go here. I think there's an opportunity there somewhere, but I don't know that it will be allowed.
Zero knowledge proof. So I'm sure we should check out our blockchain episodes and connect some dots, some technological
synthesis
dots.
Cannot be outsourced.
So
right. Automation, you want to go there?
Automation, exactly. Yeah. The first part is about surveillance. The second part is about automation. And you know what they say about the assumptions being the mother of all F-ups, don't you? Assumptions which are wrong. He has 3 assumptions about automation, which I have a feeling you might disagree on, to one of them to some extent, maybe not. Maybe your opinion's changed on that. Let's find out. Assumption number 1 about the future of AI. AI will not take intellectual jobs. I think we all know that, don't we, by now?
AI will not take intellectual jobs?
Yeah, like it was kind of the assumption was that AI would take all the menial tasks, wasn't it? Whereas in fact, it will take all of the jobs where you need to use your brain.
It's an example of an intellectual job?
Copywriter, designer, architect, doctor, lawyer.
Okay. And you don't think AI will take some of those jobs?
Yeah, yeah, it will.
Oh,
So
okay.
the assumption was wrong. I might not be wording it in the right way. Yeah.
Should have let Chat GPT set that one up for you.
I should have, but I didn't, because that's why I'm here. And that's why you're here listening to this, because you think for yourself, you think on paper, you read books. And yeah, you make mistakes as you try to understand it. Anyway, so yeah, AI, the nurses will be safe, the doctors won't.
I thought that was really interesting. So my brother's a doctor. He's an anesthesiologist, super talented guy, trained in the art of keeping someone barely alive so life-saving procedures can happen. I mean, there's an art to that. There's a physical aspect to that. And what I thought was interesting about some doctors' jobs being threatened, the idea of the doctors that assess, diagnose, and recommend could probably see some kind of AI tools start taking over some of that stuff. I mean, we're already seeing that kind of stuff, but I don't think an AI robot is going to be in charge of the machine that manipulates the drugs that keep someone barely alive. But then on the nurse side, I thought that was really interesting. There's a lot of physical aspects to nursing that robot hands just can't do yet, right? And AI won't be able to do, right?
Yeah.
So he
talked
those
intricate skills, yes.
So here's the quote. People who want a job in 2050 should perhaps invest in motor skills and social skills as much as intellect.
Yeah, well, that's why I said I'm gonna quit and go chop down trees. That's my job. I'm going to butcher this stat completely, so apologies to all the doctors out there for me getting it completely wrong. Please tell me the correct statistic. But I want to say I want to ask, what is the second biggest killer in the United States each year? And it's medical error.
Really?
So let's fact check that. I might fact check that in real time. But yeah, it's one of those things where misdiagnosis over wrong quantity of drugs or whatever.
I wouldn't have thought it would be that
but it's high. It's very high. I don't know the exact number, but it's high. It's more than it should be.
Okay. Well, so here's a couple things that stood out to me. And this was referenced in our Packy McCormack episode, Call to Humanity. What was it? What was the title?
Most Human Wins.
Most Human Wins, right? So listen to that, because we break down the whole 35-page paper with thoughts. Would love you to read it too, because you can read and think on paper and write a little bit. But very similar suggestions from Harari on this one, right? So be on the lookout for these next automation targets, right? I was writing down continual tweaking, continual learning, refining what you do, repositioning what you do rather than sticking to one lane. Because it's going to be the next superpower, Mark? Next superpower that people should be majoring in is flexibility. And not just flexibility in one moment, almost malleability, right? Being able to retrain and adjust to a job market that is just going to change so rapidly that, we're not going to be able to jump in and say, hey, I'm going to go to school. I'm going to be an accountant. I'm going to go work for someone. I'm going to be their accountant. And at the end of 30 years, I'm going to bounce out and do some stuff. It's going to be way different for those jumping in. And for those
let's hold that thought on kids and what the next generation and what we should be teaching our kids and where we should be pushing our kids and where we should be encouraging them to read, think, learn, write, get better. Before we debunk the other assumptions about automation in the age of AI, number one, AI will, I made that assumption wrong. Where creativity is unique to humans. Another common but mistaken assumption is that creativity is unique to humans, so it would be difficult to automate any job that requires creativity. Creativity is often defined as the ability to recognize patterns and then break them. If so, then in many fields, computers are likely to become more creative than us because they excel at pattern recognition. What is it about this question? I don't think any other question in AI at the moment gets people's blood flowing more than the question about AI and creativity. I see it all the time on social media. I see it all the time on television and newspapers. It's like you have the AI is not creative, the human touch, I can do it, AI can't. And then you have increasingly more people like Yuval here who say, well, that's not really true, is it?
So the definition of creativity is kind of close, right? To the way I think about it. I talk about creativity as a unique rearrangement of found elements, right? And, a found element could be a chord. It could be a rhythm. Here I go with a music analogy again, right? It could be, a topic, right? And you kind of put a song together, but, no one owns a G chord. No one owns 4/4 rhythm, but they're these like found elements that you kind of put your stamp on. And the human element, I've got a friend who's a drummer. He's a drummer for Perpetual Groove. He helped me out with kind of a 2-month crash course in getting my fundamentals as a drummer a little bit better. But I saw him post recently that he's committed to never use a click track ever in recording or ever in live, which a lot of drummers do. And that's like the element. That's your feel, right? It's your stamp. It's like, because you're not always here. You're a little bit here or a little bit there. It is a hot button though, Mark. It is like,
I think it's a very hot button because it's almost like the last refuge of so many people. Like it's the last refuge of the human condition is your creativity, and the threat that if not now, very soon, that will be taken away from you gets people's back up. And I understand the passion. I understand the vitriol. I understand the disagreement.
Well, let's go ahead, finish.
Well, I'm increasingly in the camp of Yuval to a degree. I think that creativity isn't binary. I think there are many, many layers to it. And we don't need to go very far into the past to realize that some people are more creative than others. So I don't think you can really say creativity is unique to humans. Maybe you can say great art or ultimate creativity, some level of it. But most people aren't very creative. Sorry, people. The people listen to this are, obviously, you're creative. But
well, I think here's I'll debunk that, Mark, and we could riff on this for days.
Go.
I think everyone has creative potential, but I think a lot of people, through self-talk, through getting it beat out of us in school, like all of these
labeling
things,
is a very, very, very powerful destroyer of creativity.
I'm this, not that. I'm not creative. Well, have you ever given yourself the space to try to be creative? In order to be creative, you got to be willing to look a little silly. You got to be vulnerable. You got to put bad shit out, and you got to keep putting bad shit out. And then, from there, you start to learn a little bit about that. But let's approach this objectively, or try to approach it objectively as Harari is. Computers definitely are great at pattern recognition. They're better at humans at pattern recognition. So if we had a thought experiment here and said, all right, let's look at like 4 blocks, 4 elements, 4 things that could be combined in only a certain number of ways. Say 4 things, 20 different ways that these things could be combined, right? And then you look at the combinations of that, and then you notice the patterns, the computer notices the patterns, and then you assign it and say, computer, break the patterns. And then they come out with 120 ways to break those patterns and those combinations. If you look at it specifically as recognizing patterns and breaking patterns, could they identify a bunch of different options? Probably. Could they identify what the coolest option is? What the option that would resonate with 24-year-olds who love EDM and, nacho cheese and velvet couches? Like, I think that might be
So are you asking if it could have taste?
I'm saying that it might not be able to have taste necessarily. Can it create the available options? Sure. could it create an option that resonates with a taste profile? Maybe that it creates for itself, because then it would have something to point to. It would have to first create a taste profile and then say, hey, align all the breakable options into that taste profile. I don't know.
Is my exceptional taste, is that a result of just my experience? And if it is just a result of my experience, then it can be learned.
Well, here's exceptional taste. So check this out. Are you familiar with? Have you messed around with like GarageBand and recorded stuff and like you used?
I've been in a garage band, or a garage band as I call them, but yes.
But you don't use Apple stuff, so you probably haven't used GarageBand.
My brother has used GarageBand. I am familiar with it, yes.
Okay, so it has these like little plugins, right? That plugins are like equalizers or compressors or, reverb modules, all of these ways to affect sound that can stitch together a song in an interesting way. So there are plugins where you used to have to be like, oh, I've got to be an audio engineer and understand acoustic principles and all these things to kind of like listen and feel and tweak. And sometimes you could create not just based on those principles, but based on the sound that you want too, right? But now there are preset modules, there are preset settings in there that are almost like Mark's EQ from 1960s, right? And they've basically been able to encapsulate that EQ preset, right? So that's like encapsulating a bit of taste. But then, like Packy McCormack says, and I'm continuing to like fall down this rabbit hole, as Packy McCormack kind of said, then you start getting to higher levels of abstraction. So instead of being in the weeds of, I need to boost 100 hertz by 1 dB, you're focusing on something bigger than the EQ sound of the kick drum. You're focusing on something at a higher level of abstraction, knowing that that is already a Lego block.
Can I ask you a question? I don't care if it's not really about AI. We're talking about creativity. We're talking about what comes next. So I think it's relevant. I want to ask you about what I like to refer as reverse creativity. And I was thinking about this yesterday because I was watching a Ray Beato video. And if you don't know who Ray Beato is and you like music, check him out. And he was breaking down a Pearl Jam song, Black. Okay. And it's incredible, but it's one of the first songs Pearl Jam wrote. Like, Eddie Vedder was 20, I think, when he wrote the lyrics to it. They were 20 years old. And it's a genius. It's a masterful. It's just a perfect song. And listening to recent Pearl Jam stuff, it doesn't have the same. It's like, and you see this with a lot of bands. You see it with writers. You see it with artists. You see it with people in every creative domain, that they release this work when they're very young that's never beaten. In fact, their work, their creativity, at least according to our taste, goes down and down and down a lot of the time. Not all the time, but a lot of the time. Bowie, people like that go against that, but a lot of people do that. And reverse creativity, Jeremy, we're unlearning how to be creative. And if you can unlearn, you can learn.
I'm a big fan of unlearning. I think one of the most powerful questions I've ever asked anybody is what is one thing that you would unlearn or that you have unlearned that has had the biggest impact on your worldview, right? Because we get into these patterns, we get into these hard-coded beliefs and systems that we have, and we start to rely on those things instead of wanting to understand, when we're younger, I think we want to just get after stuff, right? We want to push back on things. And, like the NASA test, the Beth Jarman, and I can't remember the other psychologist we referenced this in previous episodes, how divergent thinking, the ability to think divergently goes down, is reduced as we get older. So maybe there's a correlation between that and, artists as they get older, having, their divergent thinking kind of drop in a way. It's fun. It's weird to say like that an artist would lose the capacity to divergently think, but athletes, lose the ability to dunk a basketball when they're 80 years old, right? So I don't know if it's a similar thing.
Actually, LeBron James, but yeah,
right. He's 40, man. He's not 80.
Outliers. Okay. I think that links quite well to move 37 in Go. We all know move 37 in that famous game of Go, don't we? When the AI beat the best Go player that's ever lived with a move with an alien move, with an unfathomable move, and he uses this word unfathomability. We just don't know why. And I think that's quite a link back to creativity. We don't know why. And anyone who's read The Creative Act, we don't know why. I mean, so if we're taking it from the ether, okay, the computer's not doing that, but we don't know why. Why?
That's really interesting. I never thought about like the creative act or how someone makes something from nothing is like a black box too. Just like an algorithm is a black box, just like AI is a black box. You don't really understand how all these, what do you call them, opaque and impossibly intricate little pieces of, let's see, opaque and impossibly intricate chains of minute signals. That could apply to the creative process, right? I can't crack your brain and like understand why you made this decision or that. You probably couldn't even walk me through why you made certain creative decisions necessarily. They just came as these really cool aha moments.
Which is exactly what he speaks about with the explain your decision, this new human right, the right to an explanation. And he speaks exactly about that, doesn't he? A lot of the time when you ask somebody why, they say because X. And then he goes down, if you ask AI why, and anyone who's used the new Chinese AI can see that it goes through its decisions, is like, because A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, all the way around the alphabet, around and around and around and around and around again, thousands of reasons why. AI is better at explaining why.
Well, not necessarily. Like, so let me point back to something earlier. Let me see where I can find this. There's a point where people become apathetic when there's too much information thrown at them, or it's too complex of information, right? So say you get an algorithm, you go for a loan, Mark, and you know your result is determined by algorithm, and you don't get the loan, and the algorithm's required to give you an explanation. The explanation comes back, it's so convoluted and like so, it's like your battery life in your cell phone was 20%. You didn't shave today. You didn't use the proper soap when you were washing your hands, and you wore a hoodie, and you put an unequal amount of pressure when you're walking between your right and your left foot. Like all of that shit, you're just like, why didn't I get the damn loan? My credit is great. I always pay back my stuff. I've never had a check bounce, like all the important things, but they're throwing a spew of stuff at you where you're just like, well, what can I do?
When people are overwhelmed by a deluge of unfamiliar technical details, they might react with despair or apathy. When I read that, I reworded that. When people are overwhelmed with doom and gloom of AI taking over the world, they might react with despair and apathy. Nexus, read Nexus too many times and that's all you'll have. I was going to ask you a question about what you just said, but I've forgotten what you just said.
Speaking of reactions to getting denied by a loan, let's talk about emotions, right? So emotions and emotional intelligence, I wanted to bring this up earlier. Computers outperform people in emotional intelligence because guess what? They don't have emotions.
Yep, assumption number 3, AI can't replace jobs that need emotional intelligence. Yeah, therapists, psychologists.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Because
that makes sense.
They don't have the baggage of like, having a quick trigger anger button, right? Or, they don't have the baggage of maybe the person who's reacting to something, they're not hungover and short-tempered and all of that kind of stuff. They're just there recognizing stuff.
There's experiments, aren't there, where people in a blind test, they prefer... I'm a bit dubious of these blind tests where they pit a doctor or a real psychologist or a real therapist against a chat GPT, because anyone who's used chat GPT, surely they can tell that what the chat GPT is saying, it's an AI, because they don't speak like, or at least not really. So I'm a bit dubious about that. But this one is the second hot button, isn't it? If creativity is the most divisive and gets people's blood boiling the most, maybe AI can't replace jobs that need emotional intelligence is the second.
Yep. And that pops into this I wrote down big question for AI applications. So for anyone that's considering using AI for something, this should be like the foundational first question in the flow chart. The if this, then that diagram and flow and matrix and stuff. Okay, do they A, want to solve a problem, or do they B, want to establish a relationship with a conscious entity? And A or B, I would say, AI right now, hyper-focused and great to solve a particular problem, right? But if I want to hang out with Mark, and like this, like we're doing right now, or go down to the pub and have a beer with you, that is going to be a little more difficult to pull off and probably darker and dangerous to pull off if that option were ever available. That scares the shit out of me.
What's that film? Her, is it? Where, yeah. But if your goal is to get better for emotionally, physically, psychologically, then you give me the best human or machine. Right, we're going on. Let's move on to a question I wanted to ask you. I think the final part of this keeps me up at night. The only thing that really keeps me up at night is this.
Gas?
What might never-ending turmoil in the job markets look like? What do we need to teach our kids to survive in the never-ending turmoil?
Flexibility, malleability. Bruce Lee, move like water, be driven by curiosity so you can dive into stuff that you need to dive into, but it turns out that you're already interested in it, right? Because you're a curious individual. If you can maintain that curiosity, because you're gonna have to learn something and then relearn something, and then before you know it, the rug gets pulled and you have to change again, and certain systems now do that thing, so you have to take what you learned swimming in this little pool and jump into a brand new pool that you're going to swim in for 18 months or 2 years. And then that pool is going to dry out and you'll have to jump into another pool. You're not going to be on a raft anymore with a cocktail with your feet up and, kind of pointing down with your countdown to retirement clock. It's going to be, and this isn't bad. This isn't a bad thing. This is staying kind of true to your curiosity and true to what's meaningful to you, right? Because you should be able to kind of bounce around and shift a little bit as you figure yourself out, as long as you take care of the general money side of what needs to come in, I guess.
Cushion the blow, we need to prepare in advance. In particular, we need to equip younger generations with skills that will be relevant to the job market of 2050. Unfortunately, nobody is certain what skills we should teach children in school and students in university, because we cannot predict which jobs and tasks will disappear and which ones will emerge. And so, like you said, I think I have the same critique of this as I did in our amazing episode of Packy McCormack's Thinking on Paper XYZ. Check it out. Is it still leaves a lot of collateral damage with the people who simply can't or won't or refuse or don't have access to these ways of thinking, these schools, the parents, the systems, the communities that are doing this. So what happens to the 99%?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a forced evolution, maybe, in a way. Like here's one job I think that would be really good. What about algorithm explainers, right? Someone that can take the complexity of an algorithm and translate it into the stories that humans understand, right? Into that.
AI does that better than a person. That's not a job.
No?
No. That's pattern recognition and explaining. No. They've read every book in the world. They know all the stories. No. Next.
Okay. All right. I put down here we need algorithm explainers like Catholics need priests.
We don't need algorithm explainers. I thought you were going to say cat sitters then. So yeah, that'd be a good job. Something involving animals.
Well, but no, you can't have a technology babysitting a technology.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what, like a person. I think physical work like that. I think a lot of the jobs will come there. I think that our desire to, however creative AI gets, I want to see people running. I want to see people playing the guitar. I want to see people singing. So I think that there's still a lot of room there. Like in terms of actual jobs, that's a good thing. Should we try and name 5 now? and I don't think that algorithm explainer counts. We've got cat sitter. We've got
No, I think
athlete.
algorithm explainer absolutely counts. I'm
Okay.
gonna hold to that, and I'm gonna continue to define that job description as we move forward.
Listeners, what do you think? Is algorithm explainer a likely job in 2050, or will that be done by an algorithm? And
Right,
listening,
fair.
please put your ideas for jobs that will exist in 2050. We'd like to hear them.
All right, last piece of the puzzle for you curious listeners out there, you thinkers on paper. Let's talk about digital anarchy and land the plane here.
Yes,
So,
yeah.
bots pretending to be humans. 2020 study, 40% of the tweets on Twitter were produced by bots. Pretty interesting. This is an unfair one-way street, though, because bots can connect with people on an emotional level and influence them, but we can't do the same thing to bots. I thought that was a really interesting thing to point out. Not a fair fight. And is scale now unscalable? Is scale now unscalable? And what I mean is our ability to connect and communicate with people all over the world in near instant real time, is that now not scalable because we're at the point at which like things that aren't human can now influence that thing. So do we need to like pull back to sitting on rocking chairs with tea and talking to each other? Are we going to start seeing a pull back to the more human level of things? Who knows? Stay tuned.
Conversational anarchy, digital anarchy. I think if 40% of the content on Twitter is written by bots, an extra 40% is written by people using bots. So that's 80% of the content on Twitter is written by algorithms, and there's probably more than that. Yeah, conversational anarchy. I like the idea of. I don't know if I like the idea. I like the way he explained. If bots are having conversations with bots, and democracy is all about conversation, at what point does democracy become a conversation between bots, between computers?
What did you think of the counterfeit analogy, money market counterfeit analogy?
The counterfeit analogy.
So he talks about Daniel Dennett, philosopher, that talked about the idea that, money markets create trust, or there's trust in money markets because they're measures to limit counterfeiting money, right? So if everyone's able to counterfeit money, the value of money would be greatly diminished. So then we start thinking about, all right, he says bots can participate in conversations, but they need to announce themselves as bots because you lose trust. And it's like losing trust in money. You lose trust in exchanges and communication in this self-correcting mechanism, but we have it rooted in the idea of counterfeiting or preventing counterfeiting in the money markets helped increase trust. What if we issued something like, hey, there's no counterfeit humans allowed in conversations, or there is, but you have to announce yourself. I am not human, Mark. I like it in principle. I mean, it's an interesting idea.
It's an interesting idea. I'm not sure how you make it a reality. I mean, that's a bit like content at large, isn't it? This article was written with the help of an AI. This article was written by AI. I like the idea of it. It's a bit like what's that TV show where all the bots are walking around with a big sign on them saying "I am a bot" and just ostracized from society, and everyone boos when they walk past. Yeah.
All right, so we need to open up the Thinking on Paper merch store. The first T-shirt and hat combination is going to be massaging the Hamiltonian, and the next one will be not a bot. How about not a bot?
But they would sell like hot bots. We should do
Let's
that.
try it.
Cool.
All right, well, time to land in the proverbial plane, Mark. Chapter 9 is done. How many more do we have left?
We have 2, totalitarianism, which is short, and the Silicon Curtain. Maybe we could do both of those next week because we have to choose our next book, ladies and gentlemen. From roll, we haven't decided yet. So
choose it for us. Let us know what. Give us a send an email to hello@thinkingonpaper.xyz with your book recommendations, or put them in the comments. And if we choose your book, you can come and do this whole thing with us, and we'll have a blast. But yeah, thinkingonpaper.xyz. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify. There you have it.
Be disruptive. Stay curious.
Don't be a bot.
Read books. See you next week.